Thank you, Mr. President. I came down to the floor today to give another short series of remarks to talk about the growing list of gun victims all across the country, and I'll do that in a few moments. But having just come down from the chair, Mr. President, wanted to very briefly respond to the remarks of the junior senator from Alabama who engaged in a pretty stunning and broad denial of science for about 15 minutes on the floor of the Senate as part of what I imagine will be a pretty robust critique this week of the new EPA rules from the administration. Mr. President, when we were all school kids, we probably all had the chance to read the play Inherit the Wind. It's kind of de rigueur for students to read. And, as you read that book, in the end, as Drummond is essentially excoriating Matthew Harrison Brady on the stand, you end the book with almost a sense of sorrow about the unraveling of Brady's argument and sort of the kind of figure that he is portrayed in the end of the book to be. And I guess my hope is that that same degree of strange affection may be the legacy of those who come down to the floor and engage in the same kind of denial of basic science that is at the root of the Scopes monkey trial and the book that made it famous. Our colleague talked about the fact that the jury is still out as to whether the planet is warming. Here's the 10 hottest years on record since 1880. 2010, 2005, 1998, 2013, 2003, 2002, 2006, 2009, 2007, 2004. Senator said that the jury is still out, that all the science doesn't really suggest that global warming is happening. Well, he's right. 97% of scientists of peer-reviewed literature have come to the conclusion that the planet is warming and humans are contributing to it. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change said this in their last report: warming of the climate system is unequivocal. And my friend said that, well, even if it is happening, we're really only a small part of the problem, so why is it even necessary for us to act? Well, we're not a small part of the problem. We're 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's pollution. And even if the specific actions this week do represent a very small percentage of the ultimate solution when we talk about trying to get the temperature of the planet under control, that's a terrible argument in and of itself. That's frankly the reason why none of us should bother to vote, because each one of our own actions in and of itself really doesn't affect the overall outcome. It's the collection of all of the actions that we take in a democracy that make a difference, and it's the collection of actions that we will take as a community of nations and a community of individuals that will ultimately make the difference. Mr. President, I imagine that this debate will continue. 31,000 people a year die across this country from gun violence, 2,639 a month, 86 a day. And what I've tried to do is just come down to the floor every week, a couple times a month at the very least, and talk about the voices of those victims. Because if the statistics aren't actually moving this place to action, then maybe we can talk about who these people were. And of course, we have a fresh set of stories from Santa Barbara, California. Catherine Breanne Cooper was 22 years old when she was gunned down by Elliot Rodger. I don't need to tell the story of young Mr. Rodger, but this was a deeply, deeply troubled young man who went on a shooting spree, killed 6 people, wounded a whole lot more. And Catherine Breanne Cooper was 22, as I said. She was a painter. She was known as Katie by her friends. She had a really outgoing side. She was going to get a degree in art history. She had a smile that, quote, lit up the room, according to her friends. What a lot of her childhood friends remember from Chino Hills is that she was absolutely unbeatable at foot races. She was the fastest kid in the whole neighborhood. You couldn't beat her at foot races, hide and go seek. And you certainly couldn't beat her when the ice cream truck came around to the neighborhood. She was always the first one who was there. Her 7th grade teacher said that she was one of 2,500 students that I've taught over the years, but Katie was a standout. Veronica Weiss was 3 years younger. She was 19 years old, but her father, Bob, said that she was wise beyond her years. He said that he would actually go to his 19-year-old daughter, for advice when he was having a problem with one of her brothers, Cooper or Jackson. Or maybe even he went to her for advice, he said, when he was having an argument with his wife. She played 4 sports in high school: cross country, baseball, swimming, and water polo. She earned straight A's. Her strength was math. And she really excelled at sports, and she didn't let barriers get in her way. She wanted to play baseball. She didn't want to play softball. She wanted to play baseball. And so there was a baseball league for kids in her hometown of Westlake, and there were 500 players in that league, 499 boys and 1 girl. And that 1 girl was Veronica Weiss. She got to UC Santa Barbara, and she didn't have a lot of friends until she joined the Tri Delta sorority. It became a built-in circle of friends for her. Her former coach said, "We were really shocked. She touched a lot of people." And for someone who's 19 years old to have that many people showing up at her service, that's a lot to say. There have been kids who say, "Oh, I was a new kid in school, and she came up to me and just started talking to me. I didn't even know her." She was that type of person. Christopher Michaels Martinez's father has had some strong things to say about the inaction of Congress, but he's also had a lot of wonderful things to say about his son. His son, Christopher, was a studious kid. He was an avid reader. He was an athlete from a young age, first beginning with soccer and then going on to play football and basketball. He served as a residential advisor in his dorm. He was the kind of guy who would just welcome strangers into his home and into his room. His father talks a lot about his resilience. He remembers that at 8 years old, Christopher decided that he wanted to play football. And he remembers in a practice being knocked down, watching his son be knocked down by a much larger teammate. And his father said he remembers thinking, "My God, he must be hurt." And this is his father's words, but he was on the ground no more than 2 seconds. He hopped back up, stomped 1 foot in the ground, and walked determinedly back onto the line. That's the kind of kid Chris was. Richard Martinez urged the 20,000 people at the memorial for the victims to follow his son's example from the football field. He said, "Like Christopher on that day, we've been knocked down. And like Christopher on that day, I want you to get back up and walk determinedly forward." His father, Richard, has challenged Congress to not let 1 more person die because of our inaction. And in a lot of ways, the story of Elliot Rodger is both a caution about the limits of what policy can do, but also an invitation for us to look at some of the things we can do. Elliot was an incredibly troubled kid, but he was not a kid who lived outside of the mental health system. Nor was Adam Lanza, the young man who killed 26 and 7-year-olds in Newtown. And we can go back and, with 20/20 hindsight, pick apart the decisions, sometimes with very legitimate critique, that the Rodgers parents made or that Adam Lanza's parents made. But the reality is that Elliot Rodger was in and out of the mental health system, in and out of a number of different schools, trying to find the appropriate placement. Adam Lanza had been identified with a severe mental illness, and his mother was trying to find treatment for him. And we need to do something to improve our mental health system. We've closed down 4,000 mental health inpatient beds in the last 6 years alone. Well, the needs of those with mental illness are skyrocketing, and we know the waiting times for young adolescents, especially to see a psychiatrist or psychologist just for an introductory visit, is far too long. So we need to make massive investments in our mental health system, but the law can help as well when it comes to guns. I mean, the fact is that Adam Lanza should have never been able to possess the high-powered weapon that he did. And had he walked into the school in Newtown with a different weapon, instead of a semi-automatic rifle, there would still be children alive today in the minds of many of those parents. And it's not clear that the law could have changed anything in California. But what we know is that in states that give law enforcement the ability to take guns away from people who pose a danger to the community or deny them to those individuals in the first place, less murders happen. Now, police showed up at the door of Elliot Rodger's house, and had they walked in, they would have found a draft copy of his manifesto and a whole bunch of guns and a whole bunch of ammunition. And he likely would have been taken into involuntary custody. His guns likely would have been taken away. The police didn't make that decision, but in California, they have the ability to do that, whereas in lots of other states, they do not. In Missouri, for instance, they used to have a law in the books that allowed for local law enforcement to deny gun permits to individuals that those local law enforcement personnel knew to be a potential danger to society. Well, Missouri repealed that law, and a recent study by Johns Hopkins University shows that controlling for all other possible factors that could explain the dramatic increase in gun violence since the repeal of Missouri's background check legislation, the repeal itself accounts for 60 to 80 additional gun murders in Missouri every single year. We know that laws that keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, allow law enforcement to take guns away from dangerous people, laws that prevent military-style assault weapons from being in the community in the first place, they save lives. It's not a coincidence that during the period of time after which the federal government instituted an assault weapons ban, we saw a reduction in the number of mass murders in this country. And after it was repealed, we started to see an increase in those mass murders. Assault weapons bans don't have a lot to do with average, everyday gun violence, but they can have something to do with mass shootings. Mr. President, Edmund Burke said this. He said, right, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Everybody, I think every single senator here has heard that. And I'll just end with this thought. I think we can pass laws that will reduce these numbers. It won't eliminate these numbers. It won't. But I think we can pass laws, whether it's improving our mental health system or changing our gun laws, that will reduce the number of people who die and who perhaps lessen these literally weekly stories that we hear of mass violence all across the country. But the real risk of doing nothing, not even trying, I mean, it's like pulling teeth to get any Republican senators or congressmen to even co-sponsor a bill addressing any of these issues. The real risk of doing nothing is that we start to look complicit in these mass murders. And I know that's a strong thing to say. But it is not enough for the community itself to rally after these mass murders to shame the action. When the most important legislative body in the world has nothing to say about this dramatic increase in mass gun violence, when we allow for these numbers to fester without a single piece of legislation to address this trend line passing the Senate and the House, we become accomplices because we send a message that we don't think that the murders in Aurora and Tucson and Newtown and Santa Barbara are serious enough for us to do anything. That's a real shame. And hopefully, Mr. President, at some point over the time that you and I have the honor of serving in the United States Senate, if the numbers don't move this place to action, the voices of the victims will. I yield back.